So this Sunday in our continuing series, we come back to this place, this burning bush place, where we were last week. God is speaking to Moses, a shepherd at this point in his life, speaking to him out of a fiery plant. And Moses is warned not to come too close. God identifies himself as the one who was also in relationship with Father Abraham, Father Isaac, Father Jacob. And then God affirms that he has heard and that he knows, he has seen and heard and he knows what's going on in Egypt with his people, Israel, that they are being enslaved, that they are in pain, that they are suffering, and that he has a plan to rescue them. And this is a splendid revelation, this plan, to bring them to this breathtaking place, the wide open spaces, a land that is just oozing with milk and honey. And then he tells Moses that he will go back to Egypt and bring his people out of that place. Now it's good to stop right here and affirm that to Moses, this idea of the Israelites being rescued from Egypt is a deep problem. To say it seemed impossible would be a serious understatement. Think of something that seems impossible to you in light of recent days. Maybe it's peace in the Middle East. Maybe it's something like a cure for the common cold. Or that a certain local baseball team would win the World Series. Too soon? Maybe your impossible is something closer to home, a better relationship maybe between you and your spouse. Does that seem impossible? Or the healing of a relationship between you and a son or a daughter that's been estranged. Does that seem impossible? Somehow finding meaning or even finding peace in your work life? Is that impossible? What is it for you? When Moses heard that God had a plan for rescuing Israel from Egypt, and that he, Moses, was to play a major part in that rescue, what came to Moses was nothing short of pure panic. I'm sure of it. God's words seemed impossible, that he would bring the people out of Egypt. He had fled Egypt. He ran for his life. How could he be the right choice for this job? At the beginning of our text today, Moses is already asking God questions that he must have secretly hoped would not be answered. So in addition to the obvious, why me question, is another hypothetical question. He asks, well, what if the people ask me who sent me to do this? What name do I give to them? And the answer that God gives to this question has puzzled very smart people for a very long time. You got to know this. It's hard to even know where to begin in talking about this. God's answer to the name question is actually not even pronounceable. It's the Hebrew letters that are the equivalent to the English letters YHWH. Scholars refer to this as the four letters. The fancy name is the Tetragrammaton. However, because the Hebrew alphabet doesn't actually have vowels, the only way you know how to pronounce something is because the later people came up with what's called vowel pointing. They put little dots under the consonant so you can tell how to pronounce Hebrew. But we really don't, because we really don't have the vowels, we don't know how to say this. Some have guessed it might sound something like echya, but they don't know. They don't know. Traditionally, the vowels have been added, and the result is pronounced Yahweh. And saying this name has often been avoided by religious Jews, but not necessarily by all Christians. Another option instead is many have included the vowel sounds from the other names of God, Elohim and Adonai, and they use the name Jehovah instead. You can see this gets complicated in a hurry. Another problem is that Yahweh can also be translated as a verb, the verb to be. So it could be, as it says in the text you just heard this morning from the NRSV, it could be I am who I am is the meaning. But it's also not clear that it means that, or perhaps I am what I am, or I am that I am. It's not really clear. We don't know for sure. And then, on top of that, there's the problem of the verbal tense. Assuming it's not I am that or I am what, that is who. I am who I am. Assuming that, it could be one of 9 different options. I am who I am. I am who I was. I am who I shall be. I was who I am. I was who I was. I was who I shall be. I shall be who I am. I shall be who I was. I shall be who I shall be. So, as you might imagine, so much ink has been spilled over the meaning of the Tetragrammaton, God's name, to the point that understanding it is almost as impossible as the problem that prompted God to speak the name to Moses in the first place. It's all really confusing. But in all of this, here's one thing I noticed that I think we can grab onto this morning. God's answer to Moses' name question centers in on the promise that God is going to be there for Moses and for the people. Whatever happens, they will not be alone. The same God who was with their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, will be with them. Yes, Egypt and the king of Egypt, they hold all the cards, they have all the power. Yes, the people are enslaved to an evil empire with no perceived way out. And yes, Moses is just one guy standing on the side of a mountain watching sheep for his father-in-law. But God comes to him and tells him his name. A name that means enduring presence. He will be with them. That's his name. It's worth mentioning here that in the ancient Middle Eastern culture, names were super important. As recent as even 100 years ago, this was still true. Perhaps some of you saw or have seen the 1962 film that won all the Oscars and everything, Lawrence of Arabia. Or maybe you've heard about Lawrence of Arabia. There's this scene in which Lawrence, who's played by Peter O'Toole, meets for the first time Sharif Ali, played by Omar Sharif. And Sharif Ali asks Lawrence what his name is. And the response tells a lot about the power of names in that culture. Lawrence says, My name is for my friends. And he refuses to tell more. Among other things, this reflects the fact that when you give your name to someone, you basically grant them access to you and even a bit of power over you. In the words of one writer, when I tell you my name, I have given you a hold over me that you didn't have before. If you call it out, I stop, look, and listen, whether I want to or not. Names are important. One of the reasons I almost always ask people's names when I'm buying something or eating in a restaurant, and then I use their name, which is, some ways, it kind of wonderfully humanizes even the most impersonal and anonymous of transactions when you use someone's name. Those of you who hang out with me sometime are laughing because I do this all the time. Kind of a habit. Last week, I actually was taking my truck in to get the oil changed, and I noticed that the customer service representative had a very fun first and last name combination that actually suggested, it sounded like an adventurous experience that someone might have. And you said the first and last name together. And I said, your name is so great. To which she nonchalantly replied, yeah, I got it for my birthday. It's so brilliant. A name that actually means something. And I got a peek into the personality of that person with some humor and a connection. I think there's value in that. So this is a little what's going on here at the burning bush. Moses asks, will I tell people if they ask your name? A hypothetical event that, as far as we know, never happened. We don't know that anybody ever asked Moses, well, what's this God's name? There's no record of anyone asking that question, but God answers nonetheless. And the answer is full of meaning. Because the thing that Moses will need, this assurance the people will need, is in that doing the impossible, they will know God's name. They can call on him, and he will turn and notice, because his name means that they will never be alone. Can we go back to something that I mentioned a few minutes ago? I asked what seemed impossible for you. Did something come to mind? I have another question. Is that impossibility related to a feeling of facing it alone? For you, is it some kind of solitary struggle? If so, hear the word of the Lord today. You and I were never intended to face the challenges of life alone. God has given us each other for this reason. And here's the main thing. God's very name communicates that he is with you always, especially when it feels like it's just you against the world or against the greatest impossibility. It was true for Moses, and because of Jesus, God's Son, sent to earth, we have the added advantage of knowing even more of what it means that God is with us. That's one of Jesus' names. You know that? Emmanuel. What does Emmanuel mean? God with us. There's this scene at the end of a season of one of the popular TV series that I've enjoyed. The series is called Ted Lasso. Anybody seen Ted Lasso? Not very many of you. I will warn you, it's not for kids. There's a lot of language in it, unfortunately. But at the end of season 1 of Ted Lasso it's the end of an impossible season for a soccer team. They're called AFC Richmond. There's an English football soccer team. They have just lost the season finale to their rival, Manchester City. And the team is heartbroken and sad, and Ted Lasso, their coach, he says these words to them. Now look, this is a sad moment right here for all of us. Ain't nothing I can say standing in front of you right now that can take that away. But please do me this favor, will you? Lift up your heads and look around this locker room. Yep. Look at everybody else in here. I want you to be grateful. You're going through this sad moment with all these other folks. Because I promise you there is something worse than being sad, and that is being alone and being sad. Ain't nobody in this room alone. And during this whole last scene, the music playing, I always notice the music. The music is playing is a man named Marcus Mumford, and he's singing a certain song. That's a song that you probably know. So let's just end this today doing this. When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of a storm is a golden sky, and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, though your dream be tossed and blown. Walk on, with hope in your heart, and you'll never